Today's episode is part 2 of my conversation with our guest, Beth Turner. She's an expressive healing storytelling expert. We are discussing the transformative power of storytelling or narrative medicine in the care of our pain patients. So stay tuned.
PediaPain Focus.
You're listening to PediaPain Focus, brought to you by Proactive Pain Solutions. PediaPain Focus highlights pediatric pain information and provides tools and resources for all healthcare professionals taking care of children dealing with pain. Here's your host, Dr. Anjana Kundu.
Hi there. Welcome to PediaPain Focus, and I'm your host, Dr. Anjana Kundu. And I'm in conversation with Miss Elizabeth Turner, who has done extensive work around the power of storytelling or narrative medicine for pain management. She's worked directly with patients and families, as well as has ventured with helping healthcare professionals like us. Stories, as we know, have a narrative or sequence, and they introduce people or characters. And as humans, we respond to stories, particularly when there's an emotional detail. And we remember that information given in a story form much more vividly rather than a list of dry, may I even venture to say boring facts. In healthcare, stories are a very powerful tool for engaging our patients in their own well-being, but also for professionals in quality improvement work. The right story can also have the power to motivate and change minds when it's combined with data and statistics. As Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen said, facts bring us to knowledge, but stories bring us to wisdom. And by the way, just so you know, we also did a whole podcast on QI. It's our podcast number 15. I'll link that in the show notes. Be sure to check that out. It's an extremely great episode, was well loved by our audience. Anyhow, back to storytelling or narrative medicine. Now, storytelling does not just take place within a pool of lamplight or around a campfire or tucked in the bed. Stories are part of our daily lives. They're in our anecdotes we tell our friends, the books we read, the films we watch. It's all around us. Stories are also recognized as an important way of connecting with any audience. Moreover, storytelling is increasingly used in workplaces, advertising, fundraising, and even in healthcare. As Beth said in the last episode, it's a way of being and not just what we do. So let's pick up the conversation with her and see how we can further this skill, this conversation, and pick her brain for some more great tips and tools. So are there particular words or phrases that the clinicians, the healthcare providers can use to help patients separate themselves from their condition, as well as you said, helping put power back with them? So do you have any thoughts or recommendations on what phrases or words or what ways or directives that we can use?
And it will take time. It'll take time because it's a relationship. And in the beginning, it can be, and you know what? It is fine as the provider to use this the same until you get to know the patient. Then it can become much more individual and high fashion, so to speak, be more tailor-made to them. Mm-hmm. But in the beginning, just that, pain is a word. It is not your whole story. We're going to be working through it. Here we are in the story. We're at the beginning, and there's a lot to cover. There are a lot of blank pages that you get to write, that we get to write together, that you get to write with your family and your friends. There's always another page. There is always another chapter. And this is just where we are. We don't know the end of this, and that is fine. Mystery and the unknown is okay because it's kind of an adventure, and we get to try some things, and then we get to have the feedback. There's no such thing as failure in this. It's feedback. You get to grow. You get to learn. I get to do the same. as a provider, we get to work as a team. We get to work together. We get to explore some new things. You get to make choices. You can decide how involved you want to be. You decide what you want to do to help yourself, what kind of exercises, what kind of food, what kind of things do you want to do spiritually, things you haven't been able or you haven't had the awareness or the opportunity to do before, you get to do now. This is great. And not to reduce the impact of the pain, the empathy to express understanding, to express, I want to meet you there in this situation. And there are things that when it gets to be that bad, we need to know how to intervene. And then we can get you to a place of being peaceful and calm, and then to employ some of these other strategies that we have. And not all of them are it's not one size fits all. So it will become very, very individualistic, and you'll get to know the patient and say, oh, this is how they respond. This is how we're going to do it. And again, it gets the patient and the provider out of that automatic thing. Like, this is just the way we do it. And we're going to crash headlong into this way of doing it because we don't know any other. It's like, no, this is some uncharted territory. We get to make some new ways. Look at yourself as a pioneer. Other people haven't gone this way before, and you are, and you're brave to be doing this. Being vulnerable and being open and being honest about what you're going through is not a wrong thing. It is not a weakness. We need to hear when it is not good. And it's not putting on a false face and a fake smile to make like, hey, everything's fine. That's not being a hero in your own story. There's an element of being open and being vulnerable. So just a couple of things, some words that are just empowering. Anything that you can add to your vocabulary that is encouraging, empowering, equipping, life-giving, hope-giving, not flattery, not false, not delusional, but just something that is going to give them some sense of empowerment, like I am not hopeless and nor is my situation.
That's really important. Well, one thing that I can hear some of my listeners, and to be honest, part of me listening to you is saying, all right, but what if my story, my narrative as a provider is very different, and it is likely to be very different than what the patient's perspective or their narrative is. So what if we are looking in completely opposite directions through my training, through my experiences, having treated the certain condition with a certain way, have, a certain narrative about, okay, this is what this treatment means, or these are the implications for, whereas the patient's like, but I read this, or I saw this, or so-and-so that I knew used this. So why can't I use this? Or why can't you just give me this prescription? Or why, I'm not here just to hear you say, well, we're going to explore this. I don't know what we're going to find out. I want you to fix this. I've heard all of this before, or I have tried 17 different things. Why should I think that this medicine is going to fix this, especially for chronic pain? They'll be like, well, I've tried 10 different medications. They've typically been to many, many doctors and specialists before they come to a pain provider. Like on an average, it is about 8 to 10 people that they've seen before coming to a pain specialist. So they're like, well, we've tried this. This doesn't work. Physical therapy doesn't work, or, psychology doesn't work. Well, I'm not crazy. You're sending me to a psychologist. So what if they come up with those barriers? How do you navigate those territories where you as a provider have a certain information, certain set of data points, and as a patient, they've got their perspective that's coming from their own lens and their experiences as well? How do you fill that gap? How would storytelling be helpful in that situation?
That would have to go, the patient would have to be aware of their own narrative, and the doctor would have to be aware of his or her own internal narrative. And if it's entrenched in both, then it would be, maybe I need to do a referral. Maybe I can see this will be an ongoing clash. Maybe as the provider, you know what you carry, but you can incorporate some other members of the team that are going to maybe listen with a different ear. But you do bring up common and a pretty complicated way of looking at it, of where this can get into a tough spot. And that does go to what our default stories are and our default emotions. And if a patient may be in that state, which is right now, they may be feeling as though that they are more of a victim, that there isn't hope, that they are without power. And then the provider by default kind of gets put into a mode of like, well, fix this because you've done X amount of years of medical work and you've been an expert in this, and this is what I expect of you. So the number one thing is just to be aware of what the narrative is. As a provider, the power is in your hands just to know about what you're bringing in at that point, and a little bit of reflective thinking could be saying, this is what I'm hearing right now, that you're frustrated, that you don't think this is going to work. So this would be more going back to the interview. Do you think that there is any hope? Are you willing to try something new? I cannot, in your own role, to make sure that you're, as a provider within all the legal framework, would be, again, listening. Do you think that you would like to give this other thing a chance? Where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? If you're at a 1, what would get you to a 10? Because trying at a 1 means it's probably not going to be successful. And I don't want that to be the case for you. I would want the best outcome. So we can wait until you're in a different place. I have other people. There are some other resources. I encourage you to look at this and do other research on your own. I would encourage you to go and get, other input. So the storytelling part, just to summarize, would be the biggest thing is just to be aware of the narrative and the emotion that you're bringing in already, and then how to de-escalate yourself and then engage with the other person where they are and find out, hey, can we work through these barriers that are getting thrown up? Do we need to wait? Do I need to bring in somebody else, or do I need to refer? Does that make sense, do you think?
Absolutely. That's a wonderful way to look. I think, as you said, the most important thing is to examine your narrative and be intuitive about as well, or even just outrightly frank and ask your patient what their narrative is and where they're at. And I guess here's the other element that you'd pointed out earlier of storytelling would come that we can also invoke is sort of having the boundaries. So, and boundaries are that's a pretty inclusive word, which is an oxymoron. Boundaries are not inclusive, but it is an inclusive word because the boundary could mean, okay, here are the boundaries of my expertise. Here are the boundaries of what we know from science, from the test results we got, from the story that you shared with me, and then redirect. So that's the other piece of the boundary, is redirecting that conversation to be more positive rather than confrontational, saying, well, I know this and I don't know why you can't understand this. Instead, sort of redirecting more towards, say, here is what I'm hearing. Here's what my training or my test that I ran on you, the story that I have heard you tell me, story that your blood test tells me. Here are some of the options. Where are you on this? How do you relate to this information?
And you know what? That is the boundaries. I love the oxymoron. It's inclusive. And you know what? By doing the very thing you said, and as a provider, you can decide how many buckets or how many borders you want to develop. And maybe you have 3 of them. And you would relay, you know what? It also provides the patient with security. It makes them feel like, oh, so as a provider, you draw the boundaries around what they can really expect of you because this is your field. This is the boundaries of what the medicine can do or what's known at this point. And then the boundaries around what the narrative is doing, where it's being, exchanged. The other thing is just the control of the provider too, is not to be taking it personally, just to say, wow, okay, this is about where they are. They are in a really bad place. They're looking to me to fix and solve everything. And just to know even how that feels within your own body, like, whoa, this is a little intense. And your own narrative is, I know that I cannot fix this all. It's not all up to me, but I have resources. I can empower myself. I can empower them and move forward. But the boundaries are important. Know where you are. And then there is something I just want to quote that Peter Levine, who does an awful lot of work with somatic experiencing, and he has a book called Freedom from Pain. And he points out about how critical it is for the patient to be involved in his quote is, the key puzzle piece remains your contribution, the responses you bring to your own healing process. His belief system is that a lot of that relies on the patient. How compliant, will they be? How hopeful are they? How willing are they to engage in some new behaviors? And that's something else that the provider can gauge as well. But if the patient is asking for something that is just so not your wheelhouse, then you say, okay, I understand. This is what I'm hearing. This is who else I would like to bring in. Then it can round out the narrative and make for a bigger story too, which brings some hope.
That's right. And you're absolutely right about patients are a very, very important part of the healthcare system. And I tell all my patients and the parents of the children that I take care of that contrary to what you may believe or anybody may tell you, you're an imperative part of, you're the most important part of healthcare system. So you're not here as just simply as, I'm just a consumer coming to purchase this. No. You are engaged in this process. You drive the outcome of your healthcare. And as a matter of fact, you are the most important piece. We're just facilitators around you. Everything around you is a facilitator, but you are the driver. And I always actually use that analogy during my visits with my patients, saying, I'll tell children, a lot of children they're playing sports. So I'll just say, it's like, we're your team. We're your coaches. We're your team, but you are the one who's driving this. So it depends on how active a participant. Where do you want to drive this? And you know what? Because you're the driver, others can jump off of this boat anytime, but you're going to be with this. So it's up to you where you want to go with this.
And those are great words, because you know what they end up doing. And I would think that you would see that in the kids. It's very empowering because they may not feel like they have a choice, that they don't feel for anybody. And the other thing the storytelling does is it does shift things back to more of a patient-centeredness rather than, here, I'm going to come as a patient, dump and unload all of my problems, all of my issues and complications, and now I expect you to fix it. That is not healthy, healthcare. It's not. So by the storytelling, it is shifting the focus, some degree of participation, some degree of responsibility, back to the patient. And in the end, really power too. Their power about their words, power about how they approach, power of how they follow through. And then the doctor becomes in a very uplifting, supportive role, a good team approach. So the storytelling goes back to what you said, put the patient, it becomes a little bit more patient-centered that way.
Absolutely. And that is the biggest focus, is sort of patient and family-centered care. And honestly, we can take that in any direction, but really what's more relevant and most important is making sure that they feel truly as the drivers of the situation. And not in the sense that they can come tell you, you write me this prescription or get me this test or that test. Like, they're not expected to have the technical and clinical knowledge, but what they're expected to have is, their perspective that absolutely drives their health outcomes.
And I just want to put this out there, and I know that you're familiar with it, but I would feel negligent or remiss if I did not, just because of some of my own work and encounters, especially within pediatric, because this is just so obvious that, and just some confirming information is that I really felt the trauma. A lot of stories that I hear have a trauma point of entry and then pain followed. And there was just an interesting thing that had read from Peter Levine and through listening to some of his research too, a brief quote is, the only ingredient, this is according, again, just from his perspective, the only ingredient of the individual experience that has not been sufficiently considered in usual attempts to solve the puzzle of pain is the role of unresolved trauma that is held in the body. It's just to put out there, to say, where is unresolved trauma being held? How is it manifesting? So behind the symptom, behind the pain, was there something that happened? Was there an initiating event? What was your emotional response? And again, this may take its role outside of, traditional medicine, but it's like, I'm listening to some of these words because I can become, as a provider, more aware of them and then better resourced to say, hey, trauma may have a role in this. I don't want to re-traumatize them, and I don't want to send them through medical procedures that could only complicate. And no matter how much medication I give, it may not solve. It can help get them into a good place to receive, some other things that would be beneficial. But I just didn't want to leave trauma off the table as a factor. And that is very much body centered, how to express it, how to move it, how to breathe, how to release. There's a lot going on in this field. And again, it kind of takes us out of our head and gets us connected back to our bodies as does storytelling.
Great. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Beth, because, trauma, and I want to make sure that we are able to distinguish this, that by no means Beth is saying that pain is just some unresolved trauma and that's the only reason you have pain. That is not what this is about. And I'm sure most of my listeners know that, but I just wanted to make sure that I did say that out loud. What this really points to is the fact that, yes, there is physical trauma, and then there is trauma that's not evident to us. And this is much more relevant for pain management because pain is such a sensory and emotional experience. So that's by definition, pain is a sensory and emotional experience. So we have to take into consideration the physical or sensory aspect of it, or the physiological aspect, but then there is a huge component of the psychosocial component that comes into it, whether it's the context, the community, the beliefs, the fears, the worries, or perceptions. All of those play a huge role in pain modulation or the ultimate pain experience. So absolutely, that also highlights the reason why pain psychology is a huge part of pain management.
I did want to just enforce, like what you had said, it's unresolved. And it's just part of the tools, just part of that question to be aware. And trauma is very individual. And it might mean, I fell off the swing set. You'd be like, that doesn't sound, for that child at that particular day, it was because you don't know what was going into it, how he or she processed it, what he or she remembered, what kind of story they put with it, what kind of emotion. There could be all kinds of things. And that could be shame. It could have been, humiliation. Something else could have led to the fall on the swing set. There's just so much more to it. But again, it is trauma, which is just a perception of something that was potentially life-threatening or scary or very compromising for the person. It doesn't mean that this has to be, surviving a horrific car accident. And again, as you had said, it is just one part of the piece, but it can be a significant one if it is just not even addressed or even looked at, because there could be a lot of breakthrough for pain experts just to say, hey, maybe I hadn't thought about that, or I'm going to explore this in a different way. And we might be able to get some healing, some peace, and, some more integration for this patient.
Absolutely. And Beth, that is one thing that of all the disciplines, pain management providers, pain management specialists are very well aware of that. And there's some significant literature out there about association of trauma and pain and how that impacts the trajectory of pain. So, but it is great that we are talking about it, that we're discussing this, that in case that was, we didn't want it to be assumed entity. It's better to just discuss that. Also, the other piece that I also wanted to make sure that this awareness can also help direct our communication with our patients, because a lot of times patients come with, but I'm hurting. It's physical. Why don't you understand? Why are you sending me to a psychologist? But this can also help inform that dialogue with our patients, the narrative of how we communicate why pain psychology is important, because pain experience is driven by more than just the physical components. So, and because we want you to have the best outcomes, we want to make sure that we attend to all aspects that impact how your body is experiencing the pain.
And it would help them just to say, well, your pain is a symptom. What is it speaking? So this will help process in a different way, because it's very important how you interpret it, how your relationship with the pain. If it's just like you just want it to go away, then there becomes a detachment from yourself. self, a detachment from emotion. Then fear comes in. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in pain. Then it's avoidance. And then it's like anything that I can do just to not be in pain, then that becomes the focus. And then it becomes kind of like that whack-a-mole game. It's like, as soon as you get one symptom taken care of, then it erupts someplace else because the body does have something trying to communicate. So medication alone can be very, very helpful and it can get a patient into a functioning mode. But then, hey, let's maybe go a little deeper to find out what the pain might be saying or what it might be suggesting so that we're just not masking it and covering it up. And it's just going to pop up someplace else. And then, I'm living with a parent right now in that situation. And it's hard. It is really, really hard to watch that because there are definite roots to it. And the medication can't, she's probably on 20 or 30 different meds. And I know that it cannot address everything, but she's functioning, which is a good goal. But I would want to see, and I think she would too, a little higher level of living as possible.
Absolutely. Quality of life is determined by more than just taking medication for something. That's right. Well, Beth, I want to be very mindful of your time. I know you have to get going as well. So I just wanted to see if you had some takeaways, some thoughts, some wrap-up pointers that you want for our listeners.
I think the biggest thing is what we had hit on. It is just an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow as a provider and a patient. I don't see the trend going away. It's not a fad. So we don't want it treated like that. It's just the latest thing. It's been brewing and it's good. It is a good thing. And it really goes back to the roots of a lot of different cultures of people. And I think that it has been going on in little hidden gem areas, little tiny clinics, like in rural settings or in much more diverse populations. I may have a little bit more time as a rural doc to listen to some of this. And it's just making its way a little bit more into mainstream. But again, it's a way of being, not doing. It's an opportunity to heal, to grow, and transform. And I would look forward to hearing from yourself, from your listeners, from patients, from providers, their own story. Because that is how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we overcome things, is through story. And I would be really interested to hear people's experience with it. Your providers, I've been starting this and this is where I was in the beginning. This is where I am now. The patients like, oh, how are they feeling by sharing stories? So any feedback that you want to share or they do, personal testimony is powerful and it's personal story. So I love hearing them. So I'd love to hear the input too, as people roll along and take some things under consideration.
Absolutely. And so, we encourage our listeners to please leave your comments on, wherever you listen to this podcast, leave some comments, leave your feedback, as well as I'm going to just ask Beth to quickly give us her contact information. If you want to directly get in touch with her, she'll tell us where to.
Okay, you bet. You can, through the website is e3story.com, E and then 3, not spelled out, just the letter 3. And then you can contact me at Elizabeth@e3story.com. That's the email. And again, just through you or any other future things that we do together, plus the feedback is fine. Positive or not so much, hey, we want to take it all just to get in those perspectives, but those are the ways of connecting. To me
Absolutely. We would love to hear what you found useful, what you want to incorporate, what you were able to incorporate, and how did that go, good or bad, what challenges you might have faced. And that's how we grow together. So we definitely look forward to hearing. Well, Beth, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been wonderful. And I look forward to our future projects together. We're just going to have to bring back, and you know what, perhaps we will bring a listener and see their experience with storytelling and incorporating that in their healthcare practice. Or as you say, instead of doing it, being it. So we'll see how that goes for them.
Because that's where it matters, that it doesn't become theory, it becomes reality. And then that's where it's really important. So this isn't a nice idea. We want to hear and we want to see, what does it feel like? What does it look like actually implemented and lived out? And that's the meat of the story, right?
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Beth.
Thank you.
So there you have it, folks. What a rich conversation we just had around the power of our words, our thoughts upon which depends how our patients show up, how we can improve the lives of our patients, and how we as healthcare professionals can influence the trajectories of not only their pain management needs, but their entire lives sometimes. So, to help you further, what we've done is we've created a checklist that will be a useful tool that you can have at your fingertips as you get started down this road. As you make this your practice, this will be a helpful tool for you. And when you get more comfortable, obviously you won't need it. But for the time being, please go and download this checklist that we've created for you and use it. Make it a part of how you become that professional, and then watch the magic happen. As always, we would love to hear from you. So please leave your comments, your thoughts, and even your own experience with storytelling or narrative medicine if you've already had it, or when you try to change your practice based on these episodes. We would love to hear from you. Meanwhile, I'll be back with another great episode in 2 weeks, unless we release a bonus episodes like we did last week around building resilience. And did you hear that? If not, go back, check it out. It's about cultivating resilience during the times of trauma and stress. Another thing I would say is go ahead and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our episodes and stay in the know all the time. All right? Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, and as we say around here, be proactive. Bye now. PediaPain Focus is brought to you by Proactive Pain Solutions, a company committed to improving the access, quality, and expertise in pediatric pain care. Through our online education and consultation for clinicians and institutions, we're transforming pediatric pain medicine. We're creating experts and leaders in the field and empowering patients and families with knowledge and tools for self-management to live a functional life. If you wish to advance your pain care expertise or improve the operational performance of your pain care services, please give us a call at www.proactivepainsolutions.com.